Before we get started, I have a bonus for you. Your first CEU from this season of School of Speech is free. Visit speechtherapypd.com to enroll in an episode and use the code SOS25 at checkout. Now back to the episode. Welcome back to School of Speech, brought to you by Speech Therapy PD. I'm your host, Carolyn Dolby, and I know firsthand that school-based SLPs navigate a demanding landscape filled with challenges, tough decisions, and constant problem solving, right? But here's the good news. You are not alone, and there are solutions. To kick off this season, I am joined by the brilliant Dr. Marie Ireland, who is here to validate what you already know. Our jobs are full of tension. 9 major tensions, to be exact, that shape school-based SLP practice. And Dr. Ireland is going to be breaking them down, explaining why they happen, and to share practical strategies to help us navigate them with confidence. If you're ready to step into this season feeling informed and empowered, this is the perfect episode to start with. Let's go. Marie, welcome. Why don't we start with you telling us your journey?
A little bit about how I got started. I was a school-based SLP, probably like most of the people that are listening. My first job was a caseload of 93 in a school.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and it had a lot of at-risk kids on free and reduced lunch and different dialects, and I knew I needed to do something. So I really dug into different articles. I went to training. I joined my state association, and I soon became a lead SLP. And then I ended up being the lead of the state of Virginia for the Department of Education for Speech-Language Pathology. And with that opportunity, I got to network with people all around the country and do training. And part of my job was just learning the research and sharing it with others. And I really, really love that. So, and I started to volunteer with ASHA. And when in 2018, when I joined the ASHA board, coincidentally, that was the year that an article came out about Arctic norms across all these different languages. Dr. Sharon McLeod and Dr. Kate Crow wrote an article, and it jokingly broke the SLP internet. It was the article that said kids had to have all sounds by age 5. And everyone in my state said, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? And I said, don't worry. Remember, we have our own criteria in the schools, but people still got really revved up about it. So I contacted the authors. People told me my whole life, the researchers want to hear from you. They want to know that you're using their work. So I contacted them and said, hey, you guys are freaking everybody out here in America. Could you write a follow-up about what this really means for the schools? And they said with their great Australian accents, no, we don't have your rules in Australia. You write it. And I said, well, I can't. I mean, I've written articles before, but it's your great work. And so we decided to team up. And that led to the publication of one of those editor award articles. And there's a free link to that on my website. So maybe I can get that to you as well. And after we finished that work in 2020, they said, Marie, why don't you have your PhD? And I said, well, I love my job. I don't want to quit my job. And they said, well, you can do it in Australia online. And so I did. And so I earned my PhD right about the time I retired from state service.
Mm-hmm.
And now I'm really loving it because I get to do great research and work with SLPs all over the country. So that's a little bit about how I got where I am. And I'm still doing research on school-based practice. And I just love it.
And you know what? And we're the ones that benefit from it. And we absolutely love all the work that you have done. And we are so excited for you to share today on our topics on those tensions and that article. Where do we want to start? I know that we were kind of talking and you introduced to me chat, not the chat that I'm monitoring, but chat. What does that also mean for you?
So I love to chat about chat. That is, when you do research, you have to have a plan, a way forward.
Mm-hmm.
Most of my research was looking at numbers and how many people experience different things and how many people read articles. And they convinced me to try to learn a new way, and it's called qualitative research. And it's really digging in on people's experiences and how they feel. And so I had to learn about this thing and figure out a way to have these conversations. We all know school SLPs face challenges in their jobs every day, but how do you can't get that out of a checkbox survey, right? You can't really dig in on it. And so I learned about chat. It's called the cultural and historical activity theory. And what it does is it really looks at not just what we do. So you might imagine our work as kind of a triangle. SLPs are on one side. We use tools at the top of the triangle, and together we help people. That's kind of the other
Mhm.
end of the triangle. And so we have this triangle of what we do. But it's important to remember we're not in isolation. There's things under the triangle. There's a whole nother layer, and chat helps us dig in on that. What are the rules that we have to follow? And for me, that's right up my alley, learning about eligibility, the IDEA, the regulations. Who are the community that we serve? Right? An at-risk community is going to have different needs than an affluent community. And then the last little piece that underlines that triangle is, how do we divide up our work? How do we work with general ed? How do we work with school psychologists,
Mhm.
social workers, parents? And so chat really takes it and brings the view outward. Instead of just saying, hey, SLPs, what are you doing about eligibility? It lets us bring that view back to say, what's going on in general ed? What's going on in the community? And are people sticking to the rules? Why are our caseloads so high? And so I use that to really dig in and do focus groups with SLPs from all across the country.
Tell me again what chat stands for. I got cultural and historical.
It's the so chat is the cultural historical activity theory.
Activity.
Yeah, you use
Activity.
it when you look at something that's really complex. And we all know the school work is complex. We have so many things to do. We have our assessments and our treatment and working with teachers and following the rules and when can you pull kids. And there's a lot going on. So it's a great way
Mhm.
to look at complex systems to try to figure out where those problems come from, the root cause, and to help you figure out how to solve them. Because you can't find a solution unless you know where the problems come from.
Exactly, right? And like you said, when you just ask a speech path, what is the problem? We're gonna give you an answer, but it's not gonna be. It will probably just go overworked.
Mhm.
Just way too much going on. But why don't you talk about? Let's get into those nine tensions, because I mean, I love the way that you have it. Um, when you explain it and write them out, it really helps us go, yeah, that resonates with me.
Yeah, and that's what I found. The more I present my research at different conferences, um, people say, I experienced that too. And so the tensions, um, what happened was through the focus groups, people shared their experiences and they were brave and they were
Mhm.
honest and they told it like it was. And if you pull up this article, which is open access, anybody can access it free of charge. Some of the quotes I think really resonate with people. The SLPs in these groups were amazing to work with. And so one of the things when I did the analysis was they were all saying very similar things. And one person would say, they end up wanting to put the kid in speech because they can't qualify them for anything else. And someone else would
Huge.
say, oh, we're the dumping ground. And the next person would
Yep.
say, oh, that happens to me all the time. And there was so much um, so much of that and people supporting each other. And one of the things I really wanted to do was get that information out, because so often SLPs feel like maybe they feel like they're the only ones, right? The principal looks at them and says, you better put this kid in, or they get a phone
Mhm.
call from an administrator and says, add more time, or an advocate,
Right.
right? And there's pressure. And those experiences are really difficult. And so what we found was, in these focus groups, there was so much shared experience. So the experiences were in three three categories. One had to do with the SLPs' experiences themselves. The second category was tensions about the evaluation data. Do we have data? How do we make those decisions? And the third category of tensions was the team, working with the team. Does everybody on the team agree? Do administrators, come in and not really understand the rules? And so there were just a lot of tensions in these three categories. And so the 9 individual tensions fall out in these 3 groupings. And the more I presented the work and the more I looked at the data, it also became apparent that these SLPs in my focus groups had solutions. So one of them would say, I got a lot of pressure to put this kid in onto my caseload. And somebody else would say, that used to happen to me, but then I started to do this. And the more they shared, I did a secondary analysis of the data and found they had these amazing solutions. And so that's the work that I'm trying to write up right now. And I'm also trying to gather data from around the country to find out if these 9 tensions, problems are things that all SLPs are experiencing. How frequently does it happen? And if it doesn't, what did you do to fix it? Because those solutions are pretty exciting.
And that's exactly why I even started, we started this podcast, is because I think a lot of SLPs, we feel siloed because we're usually just one SLP on a campus. Some campuses have more than one, I get it. But a lot of times it's just us. And we feel like we have so much on our plate to honor our students and provide the mandated minutes and follow the law. But we get sidelined because of what you just talked about, is like administrator and the team, and we're having to train or teach, educate really everybody. What is our true job? Because I hear it all the time. We are the gateway to special ed. And I that's a huge one. And we get the pressure to put people to get to qualify students, because just like you said, they're not qualifying for anything else. So how are they going to get it, accommodations? So we need speech. And I think when you probably touch on it when you talk about assessments, that it's like we could there's ways that you can kind of qualify, find a way to qualify, but we need to tighten those reins on really the setting that we're in. I read in I wish I didn't write down exactly what you said, but in the article you were talking about the difference between the services we provide in the schools versus speech paths privately can diagnose and treat for pay.
Yeah. And so that's one of the really important points. And one of the things that really is a solution is for school SLPs to really, it is the universal solution to really understand the difference and understand IDEA. And we all got into this profession because we want to help kids. We want to help families and kids, and we want to, help everybody be a better communicator. The challenge is we have to balance wanting to help with following the law, because calling a child disabled under IDEA means you're calling them disabled. You're calling them, they're saying they have a handicapping condition. And so as much as we want to help, what is the cost of special ed? And so if you're not doing integrated or push-in therapy, if you're not in general ed, that child is missing something every time you pull them out. And so being able to just explain that to a family or to a teacher who says, oh, keep them for 1 more year.
Right.
How many times I've heard SLPs say, I went to a meeting because I think this child is ready to be dismissed from my caseload. And everybody says, oh, just in case, just hold them for a little while longer. What are they missing, right? And what are we telling children? Are we saying there's something wrong with you when there's not, right? And kids know. Kids know, when they have an IEP and they're getting pulled out of class or missing something that everybody else gets to do. And we know from the research data that children with IEPs do have different outcomes, right?
Mm-hmm.
Post-graduation employment rates, participation in college. So as much as we want to help, we have to remember that there is a cost to it as well. And civil rights. We don't want to call children disabled when they're not. And so it's really important to know the rules and to be able to share those with other people.
I love that, and it is powerful when I hear you say the child's civil rights. The child has rights too, and I know that we're coming at it because we have hearts of gold, and we want to help the child. We want to support the child, but I think it. I don't like the term. Oh, they're just speech only. I hear that all the time. They're just speech only. No, that's special ed, but I hear it on both sides. I hear administrators trying to get them into special ed by just saying they're just speech only,
Mhm.
right? As if that's not full on special ed. And I think we're not doing the family justice by sugarcoating what we're doing. We are literally um, making the child eligible for special ed, putting them under the umbrella of special ed. And that's the word I was trying to find. Identifying them, describing them as special ed.
Yeah. And the challenge, I use a lot of times I wear eyeglasses. So I use this
Mm-hmm.
example a lot, especially with parents. As my job at the Department of Ed, I used to talk to parents daily who were saying, I want my child to get services.
Mm-hmm.
And, I wear eyeglasses. Would my doctor say I have a vision impairment? Yes, she would, because I do. But that doesn't mean I qualify as a person with a vision impairment under IDEA, because although I have an impairment, part of the rule is there has to be an educational impact and a need for specially designed instruction. And even if you said maybe my vision impacted my learning, what's my specially designed instruction? I don't know Braille. I don't have an orientation and mobility specialist.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have a service animal. I can navigate my environment safely with my eyeglasses on. And so, although medically, clinically, I do have a vision problem, I wouldn't be eligible under IDEA. And I think for speech pathologists,
Mm-hmm.
having an easy example like that, that's one of the solutions, being able to explain to others what the criteria are and what the difference is. And while you might get a prescription or a note from a private practitioner saying Johnny needs speech,
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't mean he qualifies under the educational arena, because we have to have those other pieces of data. And so I usually hold up three fingers and say,
Mm-hmm.
is there an impairment? Does it cause an educational impact? And does that child need specially designed instruction?
Mm-hmm.
And that explanation is one of the solutions. One of the biggest tensions is actually documenting the educational impact. A child who might have a slight distortion, we pick it up because we have big ears and we want to fix things, right?
Mm-hmm.
But in reality, is it impacting their spelling? Is it impacting their reading? Are they being bullied? Are they afraid to participate in school? If any of those things are true and you have data to document it, by all means, you want to follow the right process. But for many children, those sound errors clear on their own. And what we're doing, unfortunately, sometimes we're our own worst enemies because we have these really big hearts and really big
Mm-hmm.
ears. And sometimes we get pressure from others. Put this child, it's just speech. Just go ahead and put him on
Yeah.
your load, right? What that does is that overloads us. So we can't help the children who really need our help. Kids with AAC devices, kids with autism spectrum disorders, kids who need intense support. And we want to be sure we have time for them. So it is really a balancing act. And part of it is just learning the rules, learning to explain the rules, and learning to stand up for yourself unapologetically. That's another one of the solutions, right? How to advocate and how to stay strong. Can I read
I
you
think,
a quote from
oh, yeah, oh,
one of my focus group people? Yeah.
absolutely.
One of my focus group people said, we have to not just advocate for our students, we have to advocate for our profession and our expertise. There's nothing egocentric about that. It's all about the kid.
Oh my gosh, that's powerful.
Yeah.
And okay, things that just jumped in my head is one, always introduce yourself as a speech language pathologist, not a speech teacher. We're not a teacher because we are pathologists and we've gone to school and we know our stuff. And also we also are working in a certain setting, which is a business of education. And that is a very different setting than for pay in the private sector.
Yeah, absolutely. And just even being able to explain that, right? Because you can receive services in the schools or in the private sector, and most parents think it's the same thing.
Right.
I tell people, I use a lot of analogies. I talk about it like insurance. You might want a personal trainer. You might,
yeah, right.
You might really want one, but that doesn't mean your insurance is going to cover it. And just like you might want speech in school, if you don't meet the criteria, that's not something that should be offered to you under IDEA. And so we want to be very thoughtful about the rules. Now, for those of us that have big hearts and want to help, there is a way to do that. It's called multi-tiered systems of support, MTSS. It's the kind of the next iteration of response to intervention, RTI. And MTSS and RTI are general education initiatives, but they allow speech language pathologists to be involved. So if you really want to help a kid who doesn't meet the criteria, there is a way to do that, but don't put them on your caseload and don't run the risk of over-identification or violating someone's civil rights. And so there's a lot of great work about MTSS and RTI.
Hey, Jean, thanks. She said, they said the term speech language pathologist is not understood as easily as speech language therapist. I have an answer to that. And this might be per Carolyn. That's our job to educate. Sorry, not to pull it my way, but I do feeding and swallowing. That's what I do. That's my jam. So, but I use the term dysphagia. And a lot of times people are like, I don't know what that is. And I'm like, dysphagia, feeding and swallowing. But I go out of my way to make sure that I'm using the term that I'm using so they understand the impact that swallowing has in the schools, dysphagia, to qualify for dysphagia. Because I have to talk about the difference between dysphagia services in the school and feeding therapy in a clinic. We're not a clinic setting. And that's how, I guess, my way of making that distinction. And so I do think it's powerful and necessary that we do use speech language pathologists and explain exactly what that means, what we are.
And I think that's a great segue. I know we're kind of bouncing around on this. Tensions, but I'll tell you, another one of the tensions is disagreement with team members. And part of solving that is really being able to stand up for yourself. And a lot of members on the focus groups mentioned disagreements with and here's another quote, when the speech language pathologist and the psychologist have to sign off together, sometimes they don't see eye to eye. And that stalls the process. And so one of the things is to really own, just like you said, Carolyn, own that title, own that role. And if they don't understand what it is, explain what it is. I went to school for this. I have a degree in this. This is my specialty. And so, yeah, and so Tina's saying we have services called ERSS, Educationally Related Support Services. And it's available to general education students to help support without an IEP. ERSS might be your local name for MTSS or RTI. Everybody calls things different around the country, but those are great programs to get involved with. And I believe it's another one of the solutions. By being involved with general ed, we can help catch kids before they fall. We can help teachers do better with their instructional language. We can teach them how to paraphrase, how to support vocabulary, how to cue and prompt kids for clear speech, and how to make sure we have an instructional match in communication, right? If the teacher's using a very formal register and a child is using a different dialect, how do we bring them together? And so being involved in general ed, whether it's ERSS or MTSS, whatever you call it, that is another one of the solutions to help yourself out of a tough situation.
Yeah, because you just sparked another thing that I was reading in the article about, children coming from culturally diverse, linguistically diverse culture homes, and how they get over-identified a lot of times. When you just said that teachers talking in a register and expecting, that goes along with also life experiences. And a child should not be get demerits for not having those experiences or expectations. As my mother says, common knowledge. And I'm like, Mom, you can't say that. It's common knowledge for you. I hate it when she says that. Sorry, Mom, I always throw you on the bus on this one. But it's not common. Everybody's experiences are different. And how do we say that it's an educational impact if they haven't had education? They haven't had the experience. I don't know what I'm trying to say.
Well, I think I know where you're going with that, which has to do with dynamic assessment, right?
Yes.
Lack of practice, lack of exposure isn't a disability in and of itself. It might present like somebody is struggling to learn something, but if you can use dynamic assessment to show a child how to do an activity, form a sentence, tell a story, whatever it is, and then with just that little bit of teaching, they can then demonstrate that skill. What you're doing is you're documenting their learning potential. And you're saying, wow, this kid has the potential to do it. Their difficulty is from lack of practice, lack of exposure. And that's I love dynamic assessment for that. So much great work. And that really ties into the English learning community, because what we know is that when children don't match the norming sample of the test, it's not fair, right?
Yeah.
When I did my dissertation in Australia, I had to learn, they made me write it in Australian English. I had to put use in all these words that didn't need use, like color. I had to change S's to these and these to S's. And they said, this is what it's like for kids, right? When you come from a different background, you have to learn a new set of rules. And thank goodness that Word has a setting for switch to Australian English, but now I have to learn to back and forth. But we have to think about that. We have to think about the tests that we give and using fair measures, and working with children who have English as an additional language is something to really think about. And I just have to do a shout out, because it's Black History Month. We're not just talking about children that speak Spanish, Tagalog, Vietnamese, whatever language it is. We're talking about kids that speak a different dialect of English too, because we shouldn't be the grammar police. We shouldn't be calling children disabled because they speak a different version of English. And so that goes for African American English, Chicano English, Southern White English. Again, we need to be able to educate others and talk about difference versus disorder. And unfortunately, in this country, lack of awareness and understanding about things like African American English and other dialects creates just as big a problem as English language learners. And so we think about the children on our caseloads. Why are they there? Do they really have a disability? Or is it a difference or a lack of understanding on the part of our team members? And that's our job to educate them too.
That's powerful. And I know that we as SLPs feel the burden, but I think we also need to put the burden back on the general ed. Are they providing robust educational experiences? Are they making sure that the children understand the foundation? If they start talking about a topic, do the children have prior knowledge? Do they even, if you start talking about, I'm just trying to throw something out, snow, and you're in, Arizona,
Not in Flagstaff. I think they know snow there, but nowhere else. So I think, that's a great example. And one of the other solutions from this research is for SLPs to be, and I say unapologetic,
I love
lead
that.
a profession that is predominantly women. And
Mhm.
I live in the South, and a lot of women have a habit. This is not just in our field, but in the world of business, because I've been doing a little research on this myself on the side, reading about the idea of apologizing. And so
Mhm.
often we might lead with, "I'm sorry."
Mhm.
We shouldn't be sorry. We're protecting children's civil rights. We're protecting our time and our profession, and we're doing what's right for kids. And while leading with, "I'm sorry, I have to disagree," or "I'm sorry, I want to mention," what that does is it actually diminishes your standing, because it almost sounds like you're wrong. Like, well, why are you saying something? We need to own it and be strong. And that's another one of the solutions. Learn how to advocate and learn how to deal with conflict. We sometimes, some of the focus group members, and I'm wondering if this will turn up in the larger round of research that's underway right now that I hope everybody will participate in.
Mhm.
When something happens, what do? Do you speak up? Do you have
Mhm.
the tools? Do you have the example, like eyeglasses, to do a quick explanation and help parents? Do you have the example about, private, like you want a personal trainer, but
Mhm.
insurance doesn't cover it? We have rules just like insurance has rules in the schools, and here's what our criteria are. Can you do those explanations? And do you try? What we know is that so often people avoid conflict. They say,
Sure.
I'm just going to go along because there's a whole team of people and they're going to overrule me anyway. Your voice is important. And what we know is that avoiding conflict creates something called conflict debt. There's a cost.
Mm.
By not speaking up, what happens? Maybe your caseload gets higher. Maybe you're ending up writing IEPs for kids that really don't need services anymore.
Right.
That means progress reports, and that means IEP meetings and reevals. Your time is so valuable. So by staying quiet and avoiding conflict, you're actually costing yourself something. And that's another one of those solutions, right? To learn about advocacy and conflict.
Which I totally understand, because I spent the last 25 years in Texas in the South, and I'm now back in Oregon. But I have the Southern suite. I still have it. But we want to be nice.
Mhm.
And when we don't speak up, we need to be thinking about how are we teaching our children to advocate for themselves if we can't advocate for ourselves, kind of put our money where our mouth is. That's one of the things that we are working with children, is having them stand up for themselves, to get their needs met, to get their wants met, to be able to, to be communicating effective communicators. We need to champion that and be better communicators for what we need to do. Before we go on, I do need to say, hey, everybody, thank you so much for tuning in. We will need to go to about 10 minutes after the hour in order that we get the full hour for ASHA CUs. I'm sorry, I did do a little quick in there. But just, and I'm not hating the fact that we're going to keep Marie here longer, because I'm loving it. So, okay, back to our scheduled program.
Okay. So I was just going to say, Carolyn, you sound just like one of my focus group members. I have some favorite quotes here that are in the article. So if anybody gets the article out of the chat or out of the link, this is a quote, and it says, this is about empowering SLPs and our need to be able to advocate for ourselves and stay strong. One of these wonderful women said, to be able to explain with confidence why
Mm-hmm.
recommending one way or not, and to not be swayed, because it's hard to have that backbone and wear that hat confidently when you're in a room full of people that might be questioning you. And so really owning it, right? And learning how to tell a good story, learning how to give a good example. And I had the best, most heartwarming experience. Last week, I was doing some training in Arizona, actually, online. And I said to the person who was the organizer before we started, I said, tell me again, how did you hear about me? And she said, I had an SLP that had a really tough meeting coming up. And she asked me to come kind of be there to support her in a meeting that they anticipated an advocate and some real tense moments. And she said, I went, and the SLP explained everything fabulously. And she just was so well spoken, and I never had to say a word. And when it was over, I said, you didn't need me here. You did a great job. How did you learn that? And she said, I saw Dr. Ireland's session, and I did what she said. I remembered the eyeglass example, and I did this, and I did that. And it was such a high compliment. But these aren't my ideas. These are ideas from great SLPs all over the country that really tell us how to stay strong and
we need a think tank. We need to have all these solutions written out for us that we can tweak for ourselves. Because reinventing the wheel is hard. But so there you go.
The good news is for the 9 tensions that we have, the solutions are so similar for almost all of them. And I can give you the top 4.
Yes, do.
Every category, right? The top 4. 1, be able to explain the law, IDEA. Be able to say there are 3 criteria: impairment, educational impact, need for specially designed instruction. Have just a quick way to get that out to people. Explain that the law, be able to know that if a child doesn't match the norming population of the test, those scores aren't really fair or valid. Whether they're whether they're an English language learner or from an at-risk background, right? If they don't match those scores, you're going to automatically be putting kids in because of the bias. So really knowing IDEA, knowing what you're allowed to say, use your criteria. Make sure you have data for each of those 3 questions. If you do an artic test, okay, you might have documentation of an articulation issue, but then what is the educational impact? What is the data from the teacher? What is the data, and then do they need specially designed instruction? Are they stimulable? Where's that data? So knowing IDEA, using your criteria, having hard data that you can actually share with people. And one of my favorite questions that I ask and talk about in training is to go to the general ed teacher that has a child on your caseload and say, why does that child get speech and language therapy?
Oh.
And if the teacher can't tell you what the problem is, then it must not be that big of a problem.
Wow. Okay. Mind blown. Okay, people. Yeah. I'm doing that. Yeah. That is one of my, oh my gosh, right? What are we doing if they don't know why they're even in speech? Why are they in speech?
Right. And so I learned that trick a long time ago as I was doing monitoring, because those of you that might be in this situation, if you over-identify children, people come to your school to look at the records and do some federal monitoring. And I used to go to schools that over-identified children, and I would say, can you tell me why this child gets speech therapy? And the teacher would say, I don't know, go ask the speech therapist. And right there, it must not be that big of a problem then, right? And so we need to partner with general ed, ask them for that data. And if they tell you there's really not an impact in the classroom, put that in your report. Be ready to share that in the meeting, right? Because we need that data. And then the 4th one of the top 4 solutions is get involved with general ed, whether it's MTSS or RTI or ERSS.
Yeah, right.
Whatever
ERSS, yeah.
is in your state, get involved, because we can help general ed learn how to do a better job with that instructional language, with that instructional match, and we can also help them understand who's really deserving of a referral, who really is an at-risk possibility, or what is a difference, like a dialectical difference. And that's going to save us hours evaluating children who might not really have a need. And so those are the top 4 solutions.
Right. I mean, when we talk about evaluations, I don't think the admin, teachers, staff understand how long an evaluation takes for a robust evaluation to occur.
Yeah.
And so we're asking, so your asks, when you first start, I'm going to be honest, when you first said, okay, you need to be more involved in general ed, do you know my knee jerk? Well, I don't have time. I don't have time. What do you mean? And I had to say, Carolyn Dolby, calm down, think a minute. And when you went on to say, if they understand what they need to be doing and what we should be doing, if we can mediate, what is that word? Oh, my speech path needs help. Hate when I do this. We want to come together to see, like, really, is it necessary? You know, like.
Yeah. And I think, when I say get involved with general ed, I'm really glad you said you had that knee-jerk reaction.
Yeah.
We need to have these honest conversations to really dig in, right? So get involved with general education. What does that mean? Maybe it means giving a chart of what's developmentally appropriate sound errors to kindergarten teachers in a faculty meeting. Maybe it means having a conversation in the lunchroom. Maybe it means sharing a book. Dr. Julie Washington wrote a book called Malik Goes to School. I was just talking with somebody about it today, and she is an amazing resource talking about dialectical differences. Maybe it's helping teachers use a different story, or learn something like Story Champs. Learn that the old hamburger way of writing a story with a top bun, meat, and the bottom bun. I don't know if I'm dating myself, but there's it's hamburger strategy, right? That's not good. That's not good episodic structure. That's not using good story grammar. And we know these things, right? So we can use we can help teachers learn about things like stories have to have certain parts. It's not just about capitalization and punctuation and 5 sentences. It has to flow. And so by doing even just a little faculty in service, or being on a committee, or seeing kids in the classroom, just by
there you go.
Right? You're still getting your same minutes in with those kids, but the teacher is watching you model how you paraphrase, how you use visuals, graphic organizers, how you break it down, task analysis, so much that they can learn just from being around us. And we can learn from them about curriculum demands. And so I really do think it is an amazing opportunity. And it also helps them see the difference between a true disability and a difference. If you can scaffold a child in the classroom and suddenly they get it, the teacher goes, oh, that kid does have potential. I see.
Oh, wow. That's powerful, because in the very beginning of this talk, you talked about what happens when you do identify a child or give them the label of special ed, their potential drops. Teachers may have lower expectations because they're special. Oh, they're special ed. I say that, sorry, I said that kind of sassy, but that is kind of the thought. Oh, they kind of give them excuses. Don't expect as much because they are.
And sometimes, and not all teachers do that, right? Sometimes teachers do that. Sometimes it might be a school policy. Sometimes if if you have an IEP, that you can't get into an advanced level class.
Right.
And so there are lots and lots of things to think about there. And I think the reality is that our ability to partner with general ed, in my first job many, many years ago, and it's been a lifelong lesson for me. I had 93 kids on my caseload. So I had to go into general ed. I couldn't pull them all out. There were just too many. And so I went into a science class, and I worked with the science teacher, and I said, how about if I do a graphic organizer on the bulletin board for the vocabulary? And as you talk about it, I'll help kind of put it up, and it'll help all the kids with language issues. And she wasn't a big fan of it, but she gave me a copy of the book, and I made the organizer, and we did the bulletin board. And when the kids took the chapter test, she said, "Oh my goodness, I have never had this high a score on this chapter test. Everybody did great." And I thought, wow, let's do another graphic organizer. And she said to me, "That's too much work." And it
Oh.
took all the willpower I had to zip my lips.
Mm-hmm.
It was her classroom. And so I said, okay, I'm still going to help, but we won't do the bulletin board. And I bet you can guess what happened when they took that next chapter test. Their scores went way down, the whole
And
class.
there's your data.
And there's the data. And after that, we did a bulletin board for every chapter. And she became the biggest advocate for having special ed push into a general ed classroom. She was my partner from then on out. And she
I
helped
love
change
it.
the way that school worked. And it was such an amazing opportunity. So it's not always the easiest thing, right? But you have to persevere in that ability to advocate and to know how to build relationships. That's another one of the solutions. It's not one of the top 4, but it's up there in the top 10, to build those relationships. And by having that one teacher whose class I went into, suddenly the next year I had other teachers saying, "Hey, do you want to come into my class?" Because what happened was even kids who didn't have IEPs were doing better. And
Okay.
so it was
Oh,
just
sorry.
so rich. I know, it was amazing. And so
I love this. And okay, so you just said we need to learn to build relationships. Okay, I just want to tell you what the first thing that popped into my head. Again, one of the areas that we remediate and we do goals and we find children eligible for, because there's a social impact. How is it affecting their relationships? How can we, as speech language pathologists, be effective clinicians on helping children build social communication, to build relationships, if we aren't able to do that ourselves?
Yeah. And I have seen some amazing presentations at state conventions, at ASHA conventions, from SLPs who are involved in general ed. And again, to hold back that knee-jerk reaction, stories about, there's a woman named Darla Gardner who I had the pleasure of presenting with. She's a school-based SLP in Texas. And I hope if she's listening, I call her out. She has this story about finding a frog. And that one experience, she became so intertwined and so connected with all the teachers in the school. And it's this amazing story that could never do justice, but really building those relationships. Find one teacher who, you can work with, and that the good work is the best PR that you can have, right? And teachers want their kids to be successful. And initially, for some people, it feels weird. Teachers are like, "Oh, I want to, this is my classroom. You go do your own thing."
Right.
Room, right? And for some of us, we want to do our own thing in our own room, so we don't have to worry about the curriculum or the vocabulary or the chapter, whatever it is. But it's really important to team up, because that rising tide, it floats all the boats. All the kids do better, and that's why we're in the schools, right? We're in there to help. And at the same time, you can help more kids with less paperwork, maybe fewer evaluations, because you're going to hopefully educate them so they're not over referring kids, right? Who just have lack of exposure or lack of practice. And if you can help them learn how to scaffold what is not specially designed instruction, extra time, wait time, paraphrasing, that's not only us, anybody can do those things, right? Using visuals, using intonation, prosodic changes, stressing a really important concept. Those are all things we can model and help teachers do a better job.
I love that. I love when you really talk about, we do need to be better at saying what exactly is specialized instruction, because if the teacher can do it, they should be doing it. But then what about the speech path that says, but the teacher isn't doing it? Well, then you just wrote the reason why you need to get in the classroom and do it. You know what I mean? Like it just comes
Yeah.
full circle. I
Well, and
got
what
it.
happens is we're in this catch-22, and
Mm-hmm.
a lot of times people, I have heard that from a lot of speech-language pathologists. Well, the teacher can't do it. Well, that doesn't mean then that you have to be what some of us call in our profession the Statue of Liberty, right?
Mm-hmm.
Bring me your
Bring
tired,
me.
bring me your
Yeah.
people struggling. I'm going to save them all. We can't save them all.
No.
We have to hold that line. And the only way those classroom teachers who may be having difficulty with a diverse population in
Mm-hmm.
their classroom, the only way they're going to get better is by making them have to do it, right? The only
Mm-hmm.
way you get stronger is by going to the gym. You got to work out, you got to practice. And so maybe they need a personal trainer, and maybe you can be their little personal trainer or be their buddy or give them some ideas. But by letting them off the hook
Right.
to avoid conflict, we end up with overloaded caseloads, burnout, and we risk violating the civil rights of children, making them think there's something wrong with them
Mm-hmm.
when really it might be a teacher who needs to use a few more strategies in the classroom. Right. And we also know we have teachers that do everything they can. There are amazing teachers out
Mm-hmm.
there. We really need to talk about this whole continuum.
Yes.
But even those amazing teachers, if you see one who's struggling and if you have a good relationship, then you can say to your amazing teacher, hey, can you help that one out? There's ways to network and to grow skills.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't even mean that we always have to do it, but we can connect people. We can be a hub, right, of information. We can be a hub for
Mm-hmm.
relationships, and we can
Yeah.
really help people understand special ed and general ed many years ago were separate, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're very separate. But now, in this day and age, there has to be a continuum. And it's not your kids or my kids, it's our kids. And we're all
Mm-hmm.
together. And so I think really talking about it that way is a nice way to build those relationships.
Absolutely. And things that I remember and remind myself and I remind others that all children are general ed.
Mhm.
Because there is that mindset, oh, they're special ed. Actually, no, they are general ed. They have some supports and specialized instruction, but they are general ed students first. That's something that I always have to remind myself, that everything, like for expectations, because sometimes we don't have the same expectations and we should. They have the right to have the same expectation. I know I'm bringing it back to feeding for a minute, but for example, just real quick, I'll just say this one. Like, why does a special ed child not get to choose what they eat? Like a general ed child gets to open their lunch kit and eat whatever they want to eat first.
Mhm.
Why are we putting now this doesn't mean the child that has a medical issue with nutrition and malnutrition, whatever, but why don't they get to choose what they eat first? Why do they have to eat their main meal before they eat the little treat mom put in their lunch kit? That's just something I think about, that as an easy thing, that every child is special ed first. And we have to think about what, the general ed children get to do. So do the special ed children, if they can. Yeah.
And I think really thinking about it as all the kids are in general ed and we
Yes.
are, and people have said to me, well, I only work with special ed kids. Well, if your funding is through IDEA and those kids are on your caseload, yes, that's true. But there is another federal law that has had many names: No Child Left Behind, Elementary Secondary School Education Act. There's a lot of names for it every time it's reauthorized. But in general ed, if a school is over-identifying children, they are required to set aside up to 15% of their special ed funding to stop the over-identification. So that could mean part of my job could be working in general ed, could be actually helping in general ed, whether I'm on a team, doing professional development, or even if you're only wanting to see your own kids with IEPs, if you do it in the general ed classroom, you can touch more kids. That's called incidental benefit. That's
Yes.
pieces of the law. And by
Mm-hmm.
knowing those words, you can say, no, I'm allowed to come in here and I can help everybody while
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to help the kids on my caseload, and I'm going to help these other kids who are struggling. And
Beautiful.
yeah, so knowing the law, knowing your criteria, really understanding and building relationships and being involved with general ed through MTSS, RTI, or whatever you call it in your state or locality. Those are some of the solutions. And I'm in the process of writing those up, but I'm also in the process of documenting how many other people are feeling these tensions. And so the 9 tensions have been found, if you will, identified. And now there's a survey that's going on right now. And I think you have the link for it, Carolyn.
I'm trying to get it right now. Yes.
If there's any way people are watching and would like to participate, it's an online survey. And it just asks, have you experienced this? And if you have, then there's a couple of follow-up questions. It's multiple choice, easy to do, probably about 10 minutes. And I sure would love to hear from folks all over the country because knowing what's going on is really the first step to finding. You have to understand the problem before you can find the solution.
Wow, you guys, was that not the best episode ever? I cannot believe, I'm still gushing that we had Dr. Marie Ireland on. Everything she said was hitting home. I think the biggest takeaway for me was advocating without apologizing. I think for me, I'm always saying, I'm sorry. And then I really do lose that credibility. Guys, that really armed me with something strong. Advocate without apologizing. That's my huge takeaway. Well, if you like this episode, come back. We've got another one next week with my buddy, Julie Barber Bristol. It is going to be mind-blowing as well. This one is going to be talking about CFY. And if you're mentoring a new clinician, or if you're a CFY, you're going to want to listen to this one. Thanks for joining me this week. If you have a moment, please subscribe and review the School of Speech podcast on whatever platform you listen to. It really, truly helps a ton. And I would love to hear what you think. All right, guys, until next time, bye-bye.